Though he spent 43 years locked up, wrongfully convicted, he won't get a penny from the state. Tonight, our Greg Payne explains why Strickland is forced now to rely on the kindness of others.
He lost almost 43 years of his life, and Missouri is essentially says, okay, here you go. Nothing.
Missouri is one of the few states that doesn't provide compensation for someone just because they've been wrongfully convicted. Tricia Rojo Bushnell, the executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project and Kevin Strickland's attorney, says only a small amount of wrongfully convicted in Missouri receive compensation.
Someone that was exonerated by DNA evidence, but not just by DNA evidence, by a specific proceeding with DNA evidence. And that's not what happened for Kevin Strickland.
43 years and not a single dime to his name.
What is the life that he will have at a time when I think most folks his age are thinking about retirement, and he's trying to think, how do I begin a life I never had?
To try and help, Tricia and the Missouri Innocence Project created a GoFundMe page. Thus far, it's raised nearly $500,000.
Missouri's not going to compensate Kevin Strickland, but it looks like the world is.
Just across state lines, Kansas does provide compensation for the wrongfully convicted. Back in 2018, it was Tricia and her group that made this law possible. Compensation of $65,000 for each year of imprisonment. In Kevin Strickland's case, he would have received more than $2 million.
His money can't fix what's broken inside him. So as much as we talk about compensation, it's necessary. I think it's very, very necessary because we're starting out with nothing. But it doesn't fix the problem.
Lamont McIntyre spent 23 years in prison, convicted of a double murder. It wasn't until 2017 that his conviction was overturned. The state of Kansas compensated him $1.5 million. But as he's still trying to get his life back, he has a message for Strickland, who now is in the position he was in nearly 40 years ago.
I was chasing time, thinking I lost so much time. So by thinking that way, I stayed out of the moment. And I stayed chasing something that I was never going to catch, man. So my advice to him would just stay in the moment.
Reporting in Kansas City, I'm Greg Payne for KCTV 5 News.
In order to get financial compensation, you have to be exonerated through DNA testing in the state of Missouri, and even then, it's complicated. Strickland also will not get Social Security. A GoFundMe organized by the Midwest Innocence Project has now raised more than $440,000. And we have a link to this on our website at kctv5.com.
This is another exoneration story. So we have our brother here on the screen, Anthony Broadwater. He spent 16 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Now, what was his crime? Well, he was accused of violating a white woman at Syracuse University back in 1981. He was recently exonerated after a producer on a Netflix series that did a documentary based on the accuser, Alice Sabo's book, Lucky. He doubted her story, so he hired a private investigator to look into it and uncovered that this female was lying the whole time. So this is the picture, you see, of that female right there. Lied to get that brother locked up. You know what I'm saying? Once again, no amount of money can bring his life back at all. And that female needs to go to jail.
Is there any truth in what this man is saying? What the hell difference does it make? At least the state of Mississippi got 40 years of cheap labor out of the deal. Motherfucker, you done took our lives away from it. Give me the gun, Ray. I'm gonna kill him.
was given $75 to restart his life. Now he's asking for $1 million.
I don't have no life. All my life was took away.
Lawrence McKinney was sentenced to 115 years by a Tennessee jury in 1978 after a victim claimed he was one of the men who attacked and raped her in her bedroom.
I still could not believe it because I thought that it was a dream or something.
In 2008, new DNA evidence that was tested excluded McKinney as a suspect. He was released from prison the following year. According to Tennessee law, McKinney could be eligible for up to $1 million to compensate for his time in jail. But the parole board has already rejected his request to present his case twice. Cassie Bruce was on the board that heard McKinney's first exoneration case.
I have not been convinced he's innocent.
McKinney's lawyer is appealing the case to Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, who has the final word.
It's not justice for him not to receive compensation for being wrongfully imprisoned. There's been one mistake made where he was sent to prison. I trust that another one is not made that does not allow him exoneration.
A decision on McKinney's case could come at any moment. For now, he just has to wait. For InsideEdition.com, I'm Kelly Nealon.
This is Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. Today, we witnessed justice for Jerome Johnson, who was released from prison after 30 years of incarceration for a murder he did not commit.
It's a scene outside Baltimore's Mitchell Courthouse that has become all too familiar. Another African-American man set free after spending several decades in jail for a crime he didn't commit. His name is Jerome Johnson. In 1988, he was wrongly convicted of shooting and killing a man inside a Baltimore liquor store. But since then, a key witness has proven unreliable, and the person who actually pulled the trigger signed an affidavit that Johnson was not the shooter nor present when the crime occurred.
Today, we stand in unison in pursuit of justice to announce the exoneration of Mr. Jerome Johnson, a man who has served more than 29 years of his life in prison for a murder he did not commit.
Adding to the exonerating evidence were several witnesses who provided an alibi for Johnson, which is why today prosecutors dropped the charges against Johnson during a brief hearing, and he emerged a free man.
All 4 eyewitnesses ultimately identified the shooter as Alvin Hill, who was rightfully convicted and sentenced to life. However, we now believe the sole eyewitness that implicated the involvement and presence of Mr. Johnson, which ultimately led to his conviction and incarceration of 29 years, was mistaken in their identification.
The long process that led to Johnson's release started with a series of 15 separate appeals, and finally a push from the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, which prompted State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby to drop the charges.
The result of the reinvestigation revealed that newly gathered exculpatory indirect and direct evidence that supports that Jerome Johnson was not present at the scene of this murder.
But this is not the first time a man has walked out of Mitchell Courthouse after being freed for a crime he didn't commit. The Real News was there when another man, Lamar Johnson, was released after serving 14 years for a murder he didn't commit.
I'm just so blessed right now, and it's a wonderful feeling.
In 2004, he was charged and later convicted in the shooting death of Carlos Sawyer based on the testimony of 2 teen witnesses. It was another failure of the justice system that Lamar Johnson said needed serious reform.
I was treated like an animal in there, right? I was treated like an animal in there, right? It's rough in there. It's rough.
And I actually do save lives, and we know the jury don't always get it right.
But after decades of struggle to clear his name, today Jerome Johnson has one simple request.
Excuse me. I think I'm gonna get me a home cooked meal. I think I'm gonna do that.
I don't blame you.
A step towards normalcy for a man who has endured a lifetime of injustice. This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.
Someone gave us the opportunity to look at our cases to understand that what Watts was really doing to us.
There's been 26 convictions overturned that have been connected to Sergeant Watts and his crew. One of the patterns that you saw routinely was that Watts and his team would plant extraordinary amounts of drugs on them, Class X amount of drugs, which is the top-level felony.
If you're not going to pay Watts, you're going to jail. That's just the way it was going to go. If you're not going to pay him, you're going to jail. I just feel like right now, it's a brand new beginning for me. I can start over, do what I want to do.
In these cases, we concluded that unfortunately, the police were not being truthful, and we couldn't have confidence in the integrity of their reports and their testimony. And so in good conscience, we could not see these convictions stand.
There's no way of getting away from them. They were playing drugs on you. They would beat you. They came to court and testified in my case. They got on the stand as a credible police officer. And all the time, there was nothing but lies.
These convictions stick with you. You can't get the time back you served. You can't get, it affects your ability to get jobs, housing.
I'd like it to be one message of what I think will be many messages to the people of this county, to tell them that they can and should trust and work with the criminal justice system to make this county a better place.
John Bunn has been waiting for this moment since 1991.
At this time, the people do move to dismiss the indictment.
Exonerated for murder. It was a beautiful feeling.
I want to say, I want to say thank you, Your Honor, because in 27 years, I've been fighting for my life.
John Bunn's journey for justice began on August 13, 1991. Crown Heights, Brooklyn. 2 off-duty correction officers were ambushed.
Police say the 2 gunmen forced the officers from their car, shot them, and then stole the car.
One of the correction officers died. The case was worked by the now disgraced NYPD detective, Louis Scarcella. John Bunn was just 14 years old. He was arrested, charged with murder, and convicted. Bunn shared his emotional story with us last May.
I didn't have a voice. I was trapped inside.
17 years in prison. Bunn taught himself how to read. In 2005, he heroically stopped the attempted rape of a prison counselor. 4 years later, he was freed on parole. But Bunn couldn't forget the men he left behind.
These 2 here, we could just hold out here.
So he started a book drive to help inmates learn how to read.
Hope it will unlock the chains like it did for me.
There was one more chain left to unlock, clearing John Bunn's name. In 2016, his second-degree murder conviction was thrown out. Today, prosecutors finally dismissed the indictment altogether.
I want y'all to know that y'all convicted and had a wrong man in prison.
After the tears of joy, there were hugs of relief. Some moments are just worth waiting for.
I just feel overly blessed and just thanking God that we reached this point.
The next chapter for John Bunn is healing. And by the way, the book drive has now collected over 20,000 books for inmates in jails all across New York City, and it's still going.
never happened.
It took 70 years for this day to come.
His only crime was to be black.
For decades, the case has been called an injustice. When a white woman claimed she was raped by 4 young black men outside Groveland in 1949, the Klan torched black neighborhoods. 4 men were falsely accused, one killed by a mob, the others beaten into confessing, including Carol Greenlee's father, Charles.
My father was tortured. He was hung down in a basement over a hot pipe by his hands.
Greenlee was imprisoned for more than a decade. This humble box, made of matchsticks from the prison yard, was the only gift he could give his young daughter.
It symbolized, even though he was in prison, he loved me.
After an all-white jury convicted the men, NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall won them a new trial. But the local sheriff, Willis McCall, shot and killed one of them in cold blood, claiming he tried to escape. Through the years, supporters of the Groveland Four have petitioned for a full pardon, even though the men have all passed away. There was one surprise at today's clemency hearing.
And I don't want them pardoned. No, I do not.
The alleged rape victim, Norma Paget, who hasn't spoken publicly about the case in decades, defended her story.
But I'm not no liar. If I had to go to court today, I could tell you the same story.
But over the years, findings from federal and independent investigations disagreed, and today, so did the Clemency Board, voting unanimously to remove the stain of injustice. Carol says she carries no bitterness. Neither did her father.
You say, forgive him.
Forgive him.
Forgive him. My father said, hatred, anger destroys you from within. Love brings you out.
Manuel Bojorquez, CBS News, Miami.
All right, everybody, welcome back. All right, imagine this. Imagine going to prison for a crime you didn't commit. For my next guest, that was the nightmare he lived for 36 years. Take a look. For 36 years, Archie Williams spent his life in jail for a crime he didn't commit. Convicted in 1983 for attempted rape and murder, Archie was sentenced to life without parole. But with the help of the Innocence Project, who fought on Archie's behalf for over 2 decades, they were finally able to persuade a judge to order new fingerprint testing. Just 24 hours later, the results vindicated Archie and implicated serial rapist Stephen Forbes. On March 21st, 2019, Archie walked out of prison a free man. He was 22 years old when he went in and 58 when he came out.
They have guys that's been there 50 years and over that's innocent, just like me, and they don't have any hope. So what I want to do is try to help. I'm not free until they're free.
But they just kept going on. It's like a locomotive train that was going full throttle.
Gregory Counts and Van Dyke Perry.
I got a lot to talk about. I got like 20, almost 30 years to talk about.
Were in court for the first time since 1991, where they actually got justice.
These 2 men were convicted of kidnapping, rape, and sodomy because of the testimony of a complainant who recanted her accusations just 2 weeks ago.
Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance talks about the case of the 2 men that his office worked with Barry Scheck's Innocence Project and state appellate attorneys to get reversed. Counts and Perry were accused by a woman in Harlem of violently raping her while they drove around in a car back in 1991. Despite DNA evidence produced that pointed to someone else and firm alibis from the 2 men and inconsistent testimony from the accuser and the car in which the alleged sex crime took place having been broken down at the time, the men were convicted. Perry served 12 years, Counts 27.
And during that time, I prayed for my life. And I was young. I'm scared to death. I don't know what's going on.
Perry moved to the Pacific Northwest to try and start a new life.
When I was living in the car, I was living in my car with my kids and my wife.
The judge vacated their convictions at last. Now men with records that are clean from a crime that didn't exist say they'll try to live as normal lives as possible.
I can't live off hate. Nobody can live off hate. You know, like I just said earlier inside the courthouse, if I could waste 10 minutes being angry, why do I want to waste 10 minutes being happy? I'd rather be 10 minutes happy than 10 minutes angry.
Yeah, hey, I'm not staying in New York no more. They railroaded me for a crime I ain't do. No, I ain't saying that.
Many states do not provide compensation if someone has been wrongfully convicted and incarcerated. New York is not one of those states. You can get compensated for wrongful conviction. Both men intend to pursue that as well as civil cases.
A free man for the first time in 2 decades. This morning, a judge threw out the murder conviction for John Nolly. He was serving a life sentence for the 1996 murder of a Bedford woman. Jennifer Lindgren is live in Fort Worth with the emotional reaction. Jennifer.
Russ, it was written on the faces of everybody in court this morning. This is a joyful day for John Nolly and the team of attorneys who worked for so many years to overturn his conviction. He'd maintained his innocence since his initial arrest nearly 20 years ago. Nolly's attorneys successfully argued he was convicted at a time when DNA evidence wasn't what it is today. New DNA testing proved a bloody print at the crime scene was not his, and that the jailhouse informants provided false testimony in his 1998 trial. Today, Nolly's entire family was here to celebrate, including his 2 sons, now young men, who were only babies when their father was locked up.
It's just overwhelming. I mean, too many emotions just to focus and, you know, just channel in on one, you know. I've been blessed. I have my family with me. God has sustained, you know, everything I love, and it's time to move on.
While Nolly's conviction is vacated, he is not yet exonerated. The Innocence Project now begins the steps of establishing his innocence. That's a long-term process. Today, Nolly said his first step, though, just to leave here and go have lunch with his family. Live in Fort Worth, Jennifer Lindgren, CBS 11 News.
Jennifer, thanks. Tarrant County DA Sharon Wilson released a statement following today's hearing. It says in part, it's been our goal with the Conviction Integrity Unit that should we discover any errors, we are committed to finding a solution to prevent future occurrences. To prevent a reoccurrence of this issue, we are creating a detailed new policy on the use of jailhouse informants.